Hey everyone, Harry here to talk about the continued shenanigans of the administration to try to keep from revealing critical information about their shipping of hundreds of deportees down to El Salvador, the CCOT kind of high-tech torture pit down there, and what's happening in the courts. So, first of all, in Abrego Garcia itself, Judge Zinnes has ordered a compact period of discovery, and we don't know exactly what's happening, but it includes depositions. And what we do know is just yesterday, the administration has invoked the so-called state secrets privilege and deliberative process privilege to try to get out of revealing probably very basic information. We'll see how Zinnes handles it. I think on her own, she clearly would reject it. But she's very, I think, focused on her back or her head, that is to say the Fourth Circuit and then the Supreme Court, and wanting not to be reversed. So we'll see what she does. But let me just say briefly, even if you invoke state secrets privilege, that should not in any way keep the administration from its obligation of providing the information for a judge to look at in chambers and decide whether it's the sort of thing that qualifies. Because, call me a little bit jaundiced or cynical, from the start, they really haven't had much with Abrego Garcia, and they've just been trying, I think, kind of energetically would be one way to put it, to keep from giving up the information that could reveal them to be deserving of contempt. Speaking of which, back in the D.C. court of Jeb Boasberg, recall, he entered an order saying don't transmit anyone anymore. That order was partially reversed by the Supreme Court only to the extent of saying you got to proceed in federal habeas corpus. He now has all these habeas corpus actions in front of him on the supposition, not 100% clear, but I think the law does provide for this, and it should go this way, that when someone is imprisoned or detained outside U.S. territorial range, like all these people, they still can bring a habeas corpus action. They're still saying that the U.S. violated their rights as a result of which they're detained, and that's what habeas corpus is for. And you bring it, whereas typically you bring habeas corpus wherever somebody is detained. So if they're in North Carolina, you bring it before the judge there. Here, when they're detained outside the reaches of U.S. territory, the law to me looks pretty good that it goes to D.C., meaning it goes to Boasberg. Anyway, he is right now about the business of figuring out, was he lied to way back on March 15th? Should there be contempt for his having been lied to? Was it the case that he said, don't take those planes to El Salvador, and they did it anyway, basically just to race ahead of the judiciary and pretend something that was false, that once planes enter international space, they're no longer subject to federal court jurisdiction? That is wrong. He's looking into all that, but as part of it, he's continued to interrogate people at the Department of Justice, including the lawyer in front of him, who typically would not go into court in an important matter without knowing everything and having figured everything out. But here we still have a kind of astonishing, I would say, as a former DOJ guy, but certainly embarrassing, shameful spectacle that a lawyer from the DOJ stands up and says, I don't know. They didn't tell me. The dog ate it, whatever it is. So he's still being very bob and weavy and prevaricating. But Boasberg yesterday in open court said, okay, wait a second. You've represented to me in court that you can't do anything to get these people. They're now with El Salvador. That's a foreign policy thing, etc. But I watch TV like everyone else. I heard the president of the United States say on network television, oh, I could bring him back. Oh, yeah, I just have to do a phone call, but that's for the lawyers to tell me. I'm waiting to hear from the lawyers. but very contrary to the legal position, saying he thinks that they could be brought back. And then similarly, a little less sort of vivid, but similarly, you had the Homeland Secretary, Kristi Noem, showing up for a sort of photo op at the prison and saying that the prison is, quote, one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use, which again suggests what, all reason and common sense suggests as well, which is we cut this deal. We pay them a lot of money. We're the big customer there, not to mention that Donald Trump is Mr. wannabe authoritarian, and Bukele, the president of El Salvador, is, totally needs him, wants him for validation and prominence. But to say one of the tools in our toolkit, that seems to suggest we can use it or not. So we had the spectacle of Boasberg very tightly interrogating the lawyer. Hey, wait a second. The president said he can do this. And such an obvious question, the guy had to anticipate it. And he said something like, that's what he thinks, but that doesn't mean he knows the law, knows foreign policy, etc. And likewise on Noem, he says, sure sounds like you can do it or not. Is she wrong about that? And the poor putz of a lawyer, maybe not. Maybe he's one of the gang purposely withholding from the judge, says, I'm not going to necessarily parse out every statement. Sometimes public statements lack the nuance of any given situation. Is that another way of saying these statements by her just aren't true? Or by Trump says Boasberg, who's a very good interrogator, was a former AUSA. No, that's not what I'm saying at all, says the lawyer. And, Boasberg is pressing because they really are talking out of both sides of their mouths, not to mention that common sense suggests that, give me a break. Of course, they can, bring Abrego Garcia home, bring home everyone if they want to, because we now have a ruling affirmed by the Supreme Court that everyone has the right, even the nastiest customers shown to be nasty, to due process to state certain claims, including the very strong claim, it seems to me, that two judges have now endorsed in very strong terms, namely the whole basis of authority here, the very exotic, you could say, construction of the AEA is all wet, doesn't count at all, and is unlawful. And that, you notice, would extend to anyone and everyone who is down there. So you have the courts still continuing to push on the administration. I want some answers. You have the administration, at least in the Abrego Garcia case, trying to go back to the situation of we're not going to give you any answers. And just in general, we have this mess shaping up that still could, in fact, eventuate in a kind of standoff between administration and judiciary that could go to the Supreme Court, and we're sort of not out of the woods yet. I've opined that we will eventually be out of the woods, but that's because of my opinion that even if they ultimately say we're not going to comply with the courts, they won't basically be able to get away with it. But no doubt that they're still trying to get away with it, and that the lawyers who are in front of Boasberg or in front of Zinnes are, basically showing up with nothing and having to fake it. And we can expect more of that until we get a ruling from both Boasberg and Zinnes about whether or not to hold anyone from the government in contempt. So that's the basic profile here, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.